Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the HR Tech Chat video podcast. And I have a very, very special guest with me today. It is Mike Ettling, who is CEO of Unit4. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, Brent, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. I remember the first time I met you. I don't know if I actually met you. I don't recall, but I was at the event. It was for journalists and analysts way back in the day. I think it was maybe 2011 or so. We were at NorthgateArinso. Yeah, and I've followed your career not in a stalking way, just in the background. But followed your career ever since. Just Mike's there now, or here and there, and now you're at Unit4, and it's just been fascinating to watch. And we were at Unit4's analyst summit back in late-ish 2021 in Boston. And I remember being very impressed with what you're doing there and what the team's doing. And then we spoke you spoke with us, the 360 Insights team at HR Technology Conference and Expo back in September. And we had an interesting conversation there. And there's some of that we wanted to sort of resurrect today. But first of all, maybe you could share with the audience, what brought you to Unit4? What have you been doing? How do you view the HCM market space? These sorts of things. Just, not too much pressure here, but what do you think?
Well, Brent, that goes back some time, 2011. But it's interesting because that was my first sort of segue from having spent most of my career in IT services and IT outsourcing, and a little bit of BPO with companies like EDS. That was kind of my first transition at NGA into HR and the world of HR. And, and then I went on to spend time at SuccessFactors. And what got me interested in Unit4 was the kind of the convergence of the people aspect with ERP, because Unit4 focuses on ERP for people-centric businesses. So, we're not interested in widgets and manufacturing. We're interested in companies where the resource is a person. And, how does that hang together in terms of what we call the triple play value, which is around finance, HR, and project accounting and project management. So, I say that it's constantly been about people plays in the sense that NGA was all about paying people, SuccessFactors was all about engaging people, and Unit4 is all about enabling people. So that's been a little bit of my sort of career and thinking around it. I think the world we live in now around HR tech is an interesting world, because certainly in my area of focus, people-centric businesses, consultants, accountants, lawyers, engineering firms, I don't think you can afford the luxury of thinking of finance, HR, and project accounting in three distinct buckets. Because an effective professional services firm, it's all about the integration of those three and how things happen in between those three entities, whether you recording time, billing time, learning people's skill sets, assigning people to a next project. It's all got to be highly integrated. And it's all got to be really in sort of one type environment. So who would have thought after my SuccessFactors career, I'd be advocating the power of one in terms of a solution and how it should be operating.
It's super interesting, and I have so many thoughts. One is, I was envisioning sort of a Venn diagram of those three domains of the enterprise, right? There are a few things that happen, that are really sort of, unique to those areas, but there's so much overlap, and to be able to approach an organization, as a vendor, and say, hey, we're able to solve not just for your, FP&L, but also your HCM, and we can make those things work together. That to me is really interesting. Many years ago, I was speaking with someone whose name escapes me, but we were talking about the hockey stick graph in terms of the the benefits that you can sort of really experience when you're really able to make, you know, ERP or HCM. You can really sort of get them tight and working together. There's a lot of upside there. And you know, you talk about the go ahead.
I think my definition of in that world of services businesses, it was interesting you said ERP and HCM.
Yeah.
My definition of ERP includes finance, HCM, and project accounting.
Right.
You don't see ERP as a component, but it's the overarching piece. And if you think about that sort of triangle, those three things, what really makes those businesses succeed is what happens inside the triangle around data movement and workflow and insights which you can get. So the days of kind of thinking about, well, I can buy 3 triangle points and then try integrate it and put it together, you know, for professional services firms, I think has gone.
Yeah. You know what? That's a great point, and it's really fascinating to me and really encouraging how and it seems to be a very organic, almost background thing that's enabling us to kind of think, to expand our thinking in the space where we're looking at activity in the enterprise more holistically, right? It's very moving away from those discrete silos. And you know, a great analogy is in talent acquisition and talent management. The latter, I think, is a term that's going to go away eventually, not right away, but it's really that stuff blends together. You know, I'm old enough to remember when internal hiring was called promoting people. Right now, it's called internal hiring. You have re-onboarding, you have internal onboarding, all this kind of stuff, and you have learning that threads through the entire thing. You know, this, you know, with the exception of, you know, actually sourcing the potential new external person, right? External hire, there really is no discernible beginning and end point between those two domains anymore.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think we're seeing that whole value chain from, you know, finding talent, engaging the talent, and then how talent gets developed, really melding now into one continuous type of process. But I also think there's a cultural shift driving around this as well, because, you know, HR has traditionally come at this from the perspective of HR has to manage this. And, you know, I wonder to what extent once somebody's engaged in an organization, you know, the management and responsibility for development and talent should actually be more squarely in that person's realm of responsibility. You know.
No, I agree with you, and that, you know, that parlays with this idea that a lot of HCM, you know, to me, it's interesting to think about how much of the employee experience, for example, HR is going to, you know, what is HR's natural place in the employee experience versus line managers, the people who interact with the employees having the experience, and those line managers' experience for that matter, because they're employees too. It's all really, really interesting. And, you know, honestly, this is a nice segue, because I know we wanted to talk about, you know, engagement of employees, and I know that you have some philosophies around that vis-a-vis diversity, equity, and inclusion as well at Unit4.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's interesting. The thing which at Unit4 which attracted me firstly to the company, you know, when the PE firm asked me to have a look at Unit4, was the strap line. So we have a strap line on our brand which says Unit4 in business for people. And that was what got me interested, you know, in terms of, well, what could that mean? what does that actually mean in the business? And I don't think it was then very well crystallized and defined. But the thing I like about it is that it resonates for customers. So we're in business for people-based businesses, business for people ourselves. And I think it creates a very kind of symbiotic, outward-looking and inward-looking kind of statement of what we are, which is really important. And then, I think when you think about any business, I do find somewhat the sort of constant focus in talking about DEI, almost like, well, why are we talking so much about it? Shouldn't it be second nature in organizations? And having had I think been very fortunate enough to grow up in one of the biggest diversity Petri dish experiments, i.e., the whole transition of South Africa from apartheid days to the change and what it is. It's always been kind of a second nature thing for me. So, I think to me, that's the biggest thing about an organization is this is something which is driven, in my experience, by a lot of empathy and about leaders. You cannot solve D&I with a process. You can solve it with empathy and the right leaders in an organization.
That's a huge point. And if we're getting down to brass tacks here, so to speak, as an analyst in the space, I see a lot of solutions out there, and in the marketing that kind of wraps around it, there's a lot of discussion about DEI and how it helps with DEI and all that. And I'm not saying that it doesn't, because a lot of these solutions, and this might be a segue into AI at some point during our discussion today, but you can have AI or machine learning or whatever you want to call it that's understanding who's out there. Let's say talent acquisition, and it's helping to bring in more a greater volume of potential new hires who are categorizable as diverse hires. So that does help, but that there's sort of mechanics. There's a mechanics of DEI, and then there's the whole abstraction around DEI, and you're not going to, you can I like automobile analogies, right? You can have a really fast Porsche or Corvette or whatever, a really great car, but if the driver doesn't know how to drive it, that's you're only going to get so much out of that. So that to me is where the empathy comes in. So you bring up a super important point.
Yeah, and I think the whole thing about beliefs and empathy in leaders, I think in this topic trumps process. And the reason I say that is you have people's views on DEI are kind of shaped and grounded by their upbringing. Mine was shaped very significantly by my upbringing and the experiences I had growing up in South Africa. Now, whether somebody's grown up in Norway or England or US, it's very much shaped by that. And there's no one-size-fits-all answer. So coming up with a process in North America may feel totally alien to a leader or employee in Norway or in, somewhere else in the world. Because of the sort of cultural background. But the belief system can be common. The fundamental beliefs, I always say to leaders, if you don't fundamentally believe that having the most diverse team is going to add more value, be more exciting, create more innovation, develop you more as a leader by having more diverse reports, you don't fundamentally believe that, that's an issue. Let's have a discussion. And so I think this is an area where recruiting for beliefs is really important when you're bringing leaders on around the topic. And I'm quite skeptical and cynical about, is this a category of HR tech tools?
Yeah.
Because I think HR tech tools are going to be built, if the tool originates in the USA, it's going to have a kind of the history of the USA
Yeah.
embedded in the tool. If it's built in Germany, it's going to have the history of Germany. If it's built in South Africa, it's going to have that history embedded in how the tool operates. And I don't believe there's a single process, universal process, which companies can adopt, which is going to magically change, the whole DEI landscape.
Yeah.
So I have quite strong views on this, that it's all about beliefs, it's all about empathy, it's all about the leaders. And if you can get that right, then a lot of good stuff can happen in the organization.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, and that's where the the tools and functionality that just so happen to help with DEI, you can get the most yield, or you can get your real money's worth out of them. And I agree with you. I'm skeptical as well that there's really a true category of HCM technology that will be DEI solely focused. You're absolutely right on that. And for some of the skeptics out there, and we don't judge them, but at the same time, there is actually, I've been learning a lot about this over the past few years, and there is some evidence, strong evidence out there that diversity, equity, and especially diversity and inclusion. Equity is, that's important too. But let's talk about diversity and inclusion here. Google did some massive longitudinal research within its organization around diversity and inclusion and all that, and they found that if on teams where everybody feels like that their opinion is welcome, for instance, right? So let's talk about inclusion, that those teams perform better, and because there's more innovative thought. You could call it brainstorming or ideation, whatever, innovation, true innovation versus, attempts at it, to achieve it, are two different things, but you can't get there without brainstorming and ideation, probably. So those teams perform better. And that's something I actually learned recently. But, this is not, there's sort of, I think, if you look at the general population, in the HCM technology space, especially, we're very much sort of attuned to this, and we're very much aware of it, and we understand it. But in the great blue yonder, wide blue yonder, wild blue yonder, whichever it is, there is some skepticism there, and so it's important to kind of bring this understanding to to think it, that's, this is just kind of a wishy-washy soft topic, but there is some very defensible research behind it.
I think there's a lot of there's good research at a sort of company level, particularly around innovation. Diverse teams are way more innovative. But I think when you stand back a bit and just look at a macro picture, I always say, I think the biggest living proof of diversity being successful is Silicon Valley.
Oh, yeah.
Just look at, the diversity of nationalities and cultures and founders and CEOs, which make up, that whole innovation hotspot of Silicon Valley, and all the companies which have been spurned out of that. That is not pure, American only type of environment. It's incredibly diverse. Attracts people from all over the world, from all walks of life, to create that outcome. So when you stand back and look at the big picture, there's the biggest living proof.
And you know what? That's a really great point. And it developed organically. There was no sort of authoritative force that said, you guys have to do this. It just developed that way organically. And not for naught, this is kind of interesting. I learned just the other day, scrolling through LinkedIn, actually, about it was called the Traitorous 9 or Traitorous 8 or whatever. They, way back in the day, the late 1950s, I think it was, they all left a certain company and founded the first sort of real bona fide successful tech company in the Silicon Valley area, and they all happened to be white guys. So it's interesting, it started that way, but it didn't stay that way. So it's just really interesting. This is just absolutely fascinating. Let's talk a little bit about it. This is a nice segue to HR at Unit4. I know that this was something that really struck me. And it really resonated with me back when I was at the Analyst Summit. You call it the people success department. You've dispensed with the term HR, so to speak. I don't want to take words out of you, put words in your mouth, but could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we call it people success, because ultimately, I think, having been in NGA, a payroll company, you kind of deeply understand the roots of HR as being the payroll department.
Yeah.
And you go back, that's how a lot of HR, that's the kind of the origins of HR. But actually, what is HR? HR, in my view, is about enabling leaders, enabling people to be successful. And that can take place through a multitude of different tools, technologies, engagement. So let's call it that. It is about people success. And, I like the name because it doesn't have the same control dimension, which human resource management has, and then some people started calling it human capital management. Then just starts getting into like finance resource allocation connotations, like a capital allocation. And at the end of the day, it's people, it's people and people success. And so, I think that resonates well, certainly for me and in our organization. And, my people success leader truly sees it in that light. That's her role, and that's what she wants to enable in the organization.
Yeah, it's a brilliant move, honestly, because there's people success, that term. It could have been any number of terms to connote what you're emphasizing here, but I think people success really is, because it's the word people, right? That's the, I think we're all kind of in the background in this industry, on the sideline, on the side, having little conversations here and there and try to think how can we get away from the term human capital management, or let's think of something new. And I just that was whatever, however that came about, that was a great conversation. The other thing is thinking about humans as capital, right? You make a really good point there. Even there though, we're talking about a shift in thinking, right? Let's call them capital, but let's measure them differently in the GL or the spreadsheet, right? They're not they're not an expense. They're this is where I reach the outer limits of my accounting knowledge. But what would be like they're an asset, something like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that, because there was an era about 10 years ago where there was this massive kind of trend in the industry around how do we quantify the value of people on the balance sheet, and how do we bring this kind of, people were starting to look at it through a lens of very kind of accounting type lens. I think it's fundamentally flawed. And at the end of the day, it's like trying to quantify the unquantifiable, in the sense that we know that organizations with a better people dynamic across multiple dimensions are way more successful. So let's put our energy into trying to create that dynamic and sustain it, versus putting a whole lot of energy into trying to quantify it and measure it. Because guess what? You'll know it when you see it. You'll know it when you feel it and experience it. You don't need an accountant to measure it and tell it to you.
I feel like you're my spirit animal right now. I totally agree, right? Let's just put that into place for the best possible employer culture there is, and let's wait and see what happens, knowing that it will be good, right? You're absolutely right. It's fundamentally flawed to try to quantify that, because it's an unknown quantity. Aside from the fact that we know it will be greater than zero, it's an unknown quantity. It could be $1 million here, it could be 100,000 there, it could be $67 somewhere else, but it's going to be in the an upward trajectory. That's why it doesn't fit into the spreadsheet. And so, to look at organizational success solely through the lens of the accounting spreadsheet, or organizational health solely through the lens of the accounting spreadsheet, is that's only a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, I totally agree. And not to, I run a private equity based company, so not to undermine the importance of, financial metrics.
Mm-hmm.
But I think people's success and the people dynamic is a very powerful lead indicator
Mm-hmm.
to where the financial dynamic is going to end up. And it's a little bit different now with so much work from home. But, I used to say 5-6 years ago that when you walk into a company and you walk into the lobby and you spend your first 10 minutes walking around, 10 minutes, you can get a feel for the culture of the organization.
Yeah.
And many of us would make, I walk into a lot of companies selling to HR leaders. You'd formulate a view on the entire company based on that dynamic when you walk into the company. And I would say, being an accountant by profession, the views I formulate walking into the lobby of a company and touching and seeing the culture a bit are as equally important as the views I'd formulate looking at their balance sheet.
Mm.
And I'd probably get more predictive views out of the first one than looking at the balance sheet.
That's saying something. That is so profound. And I'm glad you brought this up around, being able to really kind of sense the culture walking around for 10 minutes. And, and again, it's a little bit different now with work from home and all of that, but especially when you're selling, when you are, I'll use the word selling a product to people leaders, especially that to me is just essential. It's indispensable. It's inextricably linked to your success in growing your market share, is to have that, because every single one of your customers or prospective customers is going to look to you you will resonate with them as an inspiration, because they are in various stages of HR maturity or HCM maturity, whichever you want to call it, and they aspire to have a culture that matches the energy of yours. So it's not just about the functionality. Obviously, your functionality needs to be good, but if you have two companies whose functionality are that don't suck, right? They're both good enough. The one that has a better culture is, it's not going to be a perfect, undefeated season, but they are going to win those deals more than the others.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because the culture, how your people show up in front of a potential customer, sends a strong signal to what that 5, 6, 7 year, 10-year experience is going to be. And remember, the more suite type the solution, like ERP, the less the longer the cycles. People don't want to replace ERP every 2 years. They might replace compensation management every, but ERP, once you're in, you want to be there for 10 years. So people are really looking at ERP when they think about it as a marriage. And all those non tangible factors really count. Yeah,
you need to choose your mate well. Yeah. Oh, this has been absolutely fascinating, Mike. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really interesting stuff you're doing at Unit4.
Thank you, Brent. It's been great to talk to you. And just to remind you, this is live mic, not a bot. So,
yes, this is not a deep fake. This is real. And maybe we'll talk about AI on our next podcast. I'd love to have you back.
Thought we had to say that with what's going on in the industry.
I know, right? Thank you very much, Mike.
Take care.